Have you ever imagined a scenario where hunger, cold, and desperation push humanity to its darkest corners, akin to a real-life apocalypse? Greetings everyone, today we'll delve into the chilling tale of Stalin's Cannibalistic Island. A grim chapter from the Soviet Union's history. In the 1930s, the Soviet Union, under Stalin's regime, deported thousands to Nazino Island in Siberia. With limited supplies, extreme conditions, and a flawed system, the island quickly descended into chaos, leading to a horrifying episode of human cannibalism. If you find this video interesting, please support us by hitting the like button. Now, let's get started. Let's focus on the tragic events of Nazino Island in the Soviet Union's history. Movies and video games often depict human savagery in confined spaces with scarce resources. Under dire circumstances, the human psyche can exhibit extreme cruelty. As history has shown us time and again, the events on Nazino Island in 1933 eerily mirror such post-apocalyptic situations. The tragedy began with the restoration of the passport system in the Soviet Union. In the past, Russia had used the passport system to control and regulate the movement of peasants, but in the lagging countryside, it was virtually impossible for peasants without passports to move to other regions, since they could not even be issued documents. The Russian Revolution of 1917 abolished the passport system, and people were free to live wherever they wanted and look for work. Peasants, previously confined to the countryside, sought better opportunities by moving to urban areas within the Soviet Union. As a result, the urban population grew rapidly and security deteriorated rapidly. After Lenin's death, Stalin, seeking to address urban security issues, reinstated the passport system. The passport system was restored, and city residents, primarily those essential for city production and maintenance, were issued passports. However, the peasants who had migrated to the cities were largely excluded. Passports came to be regarded as so-called identity documents, and without them, people were deemed ineligible to live in the cities. The Soviets deported peasants, vagrants, and former clergy to Siberia as they were the main culprits, causing problems and social unrest. In addition, Genlif Yagoda, head of the Soviet secret police NKVD, approached Stalin with a plan. Yagoda's plan was to force 2 million people, not only illegal residents, to move to Siberia from the beginning to establish farms. Yagoda, who was extremely anxious, did not wait for Stalin's approval to begin implementing his plan. However, Yagoda's plan was riddled with problems. At the time, the Soviet Union was experiencing severe food shortages, and there was no proper calculation of the food and costs of relocating and settling the people. Nevertheless, Yagoda went ahead with his plan. For instance, in Moscow, 85,937 people were detained, and in Leningrad, 4,776 were relocated to a temporary camp in Tomsk. All those detained were people without passports or criminals. According to a report discovered after the tragedy, the detainees were rounded up and taken away, regardless of whether they had passports or not, just to make up the numbers. Bus drivers who were out on the street, smoking cigarettes, people who were just out to watch a soccer game, children, the elderly, and even pregnant women were detained simply because they happened not to have a passport. This was not the only problem. The temporary camp, which had been overflowing with prisoners for a month before its completion, was not even properly equipped with the bare minimum of facilities, and those detained and taken to Tomsk were fed only 10 ounces of bread a day. In addition, they suffered from infectious diseases due to the unsanitary conditions. They rioted for drinking water, but were quickly suppressed. However, with 50,000 prisoners, there was no telling what the Soviets would do, so the Soviets eventually decided to send about 6,700 prisoners to an isolated area, that is Nazino Island. Nazino Island is about 500 miles from Tomsk, and is one of the most sparsely populated places in western Siberia, inhabited only by a small number of natives. While the transport of prisoners was solved by the lumber barges, the problem was food. During the transport, the prisoners were given only 7 ounces of bread per day. And during this time 27 people starved to death. A week later, 20 tons of flour was sent to the island. But there were no cooking utensils or facilities to make bread. They consumed a porridge-like mixture. By dissolving the flour in whatever they had, like hats and shoes. The brief respite from hunger soon led to other problems. People suffered from diarrhea and stomach pains. Nazino Island, densely populated with detainees and undocumented individuals, epitomized the law of the jungle, where only the fittest survived. The few criminals who were assigned as group leaders were in charge of flour. Rationing, and a monopoly on food began. The guards were preoccupied with taking expensive clothes and shoes from the peaceful people, and paid no attention to the fights among the prisoners. In addition to food, the cold weather in Siberia also made people suffer. People were taken to Siberia in the same clothes they were wearing when they were held on the streets. So they did not have extra clothes or the tools necessary to make a temporary home. Many people, exhausted from overwork, accidentally burned themselves while sleeping too close to the fires they made for warmth. In addition to suffering from hunger and cold, it was impossible to escape from the island. The island was surrounded by guards with machine guns, and anyone who tried to escape was immediately shot to death. Hundreds of bodies were floating around the island of Nazino. Even if they were lucky enough to escape, it was almost impossible to survive and return alive in Siberia without food or clothing to protect them from the cold. The island of Nazino was in chaos. Violent groups appeared and began robbing the weak of food and other necessities. As the island began to run out of food and resources, even those who had not been violent began to fight. Eventually, after the fighting, the dead felt nothing, and the gold rings and valuables taken from the corpses became the currency of the island's small society. The guards, who were few in number compared to the forced transferees, managed the people through fear, punishing desertion and petty behavior rather than improving the situation. The island's atrocious conditions even forced a doctor, who had come to take a census, to leave the island. The food supply ran out and people began to attack and eat each other out of sheer hunger. Cannibalism began. At first it was only the criminals who killed and ate, but soon the weak became the targets. Reason was abandoned as pure survival instincts took over. A man named Ubrov, a survivor of Nazino Island, who was accused of eating, said, "I did not kill people. I only ate people who had no chance of living or who were dead. It would be easier to die quickly than to suffer for 2 or 3 days, that's all." There is testimony from a man who was a watchman on Nazino Island. The man is in love with a woman who is one of the forced transferees. He asked his colleague to watch over her and left for a short time. But when he returned, the man saw his girlfriend tied to a tree and eaten to death. Some details are too distressing to delve into. The island's security officer reported the misconduct and abuses, leading to the arrest of 50 watchmen. Yet, despite this, the tragedy of Nazino Island seemed destined to quietly fade into history. The truth of this tragedy was revealed by Vasily Veliko, then a low-ranking member of the Communist Party, when Veliko visited Nazino Island to investigate the results of the Soviet Union's population relocation policy. He was confronted with hell. Nazino Island was a pile of corpses. Veliko put his report to the top on hold, and set about getting to the bottom of the situation. He interviewed survivors, local residents, and all he could, and reported the details of the island tragedy. Veliko's report also reached the ears of Stalin. However, the tragedy on Nazino Island was downplayed when the Soviet Union learned of the facts, and Veliko was kicked out of the party. But this was not the end of the tragedy on Nazino Island, where 4,000 of the 6,700 people died or went missing in 13 weeks. Though survivors from Nazino Island were relocated, most lacked proper medical care and battled various diseases. Not surprisingly, hundreds of survivors died of malnutrition and typhoid fever during the phase process. Later, the tragedy on Nazino Island significantly influenced the re-evaluation of the Soviet Union's extensive forced relocation policy. Veliko's detailed report on the tragedy was classified and remained hidden from the public for years. The tragedy of Nazino Island became widely known in 1988, with the revelations by the Russian human rights organization Memorial. Veliko's report was made public in 1994. It took 60 years after the tragedy for the public to become fully aware of it. Today, a cross stands on Nazino Island in memory of the victims. And it's commonly referred to by Russians as the Island of Death. The tragedy of Nazino Island became more widely known in 2006. With the book, The Island of Cannibalism, written by French-Soviet expert Nicolas Vert, and a documentary was made about it. This dark chapter in the history of the Soviet Union serves as a stark reminder of a tragedy that must never be repeated. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insightful content. Take care and see you in the next video. Goodbye.